She walks like she's got one leg in the grave, Marcus Rivera joked, mimicking Sergeant Elena Martinez's uneven gait. The other recruits laughed nervously, not knowing they were watching someone mock a living legend. Elena said nothing, she never did. But Rivera's arrogance was about to meet reality when he discovered that the zombie he'd been insulting was Phoenix, the soldier who died twice and came back to life, who crawled through hell to save others, and who now carried those fires in her scars. The early morning fog still clung to the dirt of Fort Thunder, a base tucked deep in the heart of Texas where young recruits came in soft and left with steel in their veins. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the boots had already hit the ground. The buzz of uncertainty filled the air as a fresh batch of recruits stood in formation, stiff with nerves and sleep-deprived confusion. Then she walked in. Sergeant Elena Martinez wasn't tall, but her presence towered over them. Her face bore the signature of war, long pale scars trailing down her right cheek, disappearing beneath her uniform collar. Another curled along her forearm, visible just under the edge of her rolled-up sleeve. Her expression was unreadable, her walk firm despite the subtle limp she didn't bother to hide. The recruits didn't know her name yet, but they noticed the silence that fell when she stepped onto the training ground. Among them, Private Marcus Rivera stifled a laugh. "Who let the zombie in?" he whispered to the recruit next to him, grinning smugly. "Must have stitched her together from leftovers." A few chuckled under their breath, but most stayed quiet, eyes forward. Elena said nothing. She moved past them like a ghost made of discipline and gunpowder, inspecting the line, scanning faces. Her eyes briefly landed on Rivera, but not long enough to make a scene, just long enough to remind him she had hurt him and didn't care. The group was handed over to her that morning, their official instructor for the next 8 weeks of brutal basic training. The commanding officer made it clear, "Sergeant Martinez has seen more combat than most of you will ever dream of. Listen, learn, survive." As soon as they were alone, her voice sliced through the morning chill like a blade. "I'm not your babysitter. I'm not your friend. I'm the wall between you and failure. Understand?" "Yes, Sergeant," they shouted back, though their voices trembled. "Then move." She ran them hard. No mercy, no excuses. Recruits dropped to their knees in exhaustion. Some vomited. Others cried in the shower stalls when they thought no one could hear. Elena watched it all with a calm, calculated eye, not out of cruelty, but because she knew what it took to keep people alive when things got real. Still, Rivera kept his attitude. "She walks like she's got one leg in the grave," he joked one evening. "Bet she got those scars tripping over her own ego." He was loud, he wanted her to hear. And she did. But again, nothing. No reprimand, no punishment. Not yet. It irritated him more than if she had yelled. He didn't understand why someone like her got to walk around like a legend when she looked like she belonged in a hospital bed. What Rivera didn't know, what none of them knew, was that those scars came from a roadside bomb outside Kandahar. That Elena had been thrown from a Humvee, bleeding and burning, only to crawl back through the fire to drag out 3 of her brothers in arms. 2 lived. 1 didn't. But that was a story she hadn't told them. Not yet. That night, Rivera and a few others were in the barracks, laughing quietly. He mimicked her voice, lowering his pitch and walking with an exaggerated limp. The others laughed nervously, unsure if it was funny or foolish. Elena stood just outside the door, listening. Then turned and walked away without a word because Sergeant Elena Martinez believed in something most recruits hadn't learned yet. The battlefield isn't always out there. It starts in the mind. And soon, Rivera would learn that too, one humiliating lesson at a time. The second week brought heat. Texas sun beat down like punishment, and tempers simmered just beneath the surface. Blisters formed on hands and feet, sleep was rare, comfort non-existent. Recruits were learning the difference between discomfort and despair, but Rivera, he still hadn't learned humility. Every morning, Elena stood in front of them, expression hard as granite, scars exposed like living proof of survival. Her commands were clear, sharp, and precise. No one questioned her tactics, they were brutal, but they worked. Rivera, however, couldn't help himself. During formation, he'd nudge the guy next to him, "Watch the way she limps. I swear she's powered by WD-40. Snickers rippled, some hesitant, some real. He thrived on the attention. Rivera wasn't the worst recruit when it came to physical performance, but mentally, he was immature, cocky, used to being the center of the room. What he didn't realize was that his jokes weren't just noticed, they were being remembered. One afternoon, during a forced march through thick brush and steep terrain, Elena led from the front. No other drill sergeant did that, most walked alongside or behind. Not her. She carried her gear, limped through the dust, and never once asked for a break. Sweat soaked through her camo, streaking down the burned scars on her neck like rain on cracked earth. Rivera trudged behind, whispering, "Bet she's doing it for sympathy. Just wants us to feel sorry for her." But others weren't laughing as easily now. Private Lewis, a quiet kid from Montana, snapped at him, "Then why is she still at the front, carrying twice as much as you?" Rivera brushed it off, but a flicker of insecurity touched his face. He was no longer the center of the group. Elena was, not because she tried to be, but because she simply outperformed, outlasted, and outdisciplined every single one of them. That night in the mess hall, Rivera raised his voice again. "Y'all ever wonder what she looked like before she got melted? Bet she was hot." The table went silent. Elena was behind him. He didn't see her, but the recruits did. Their eyes grew wide with panic. "Private Rivera," she said coolly. He stiffened and slowly turned. "Yes, Sergeant." She stared at him for a long second, no anger in her eyes, just that eerie calm that always seemed more dangerous than rage. "Finish your food. You're on latrine duty until further notice." He swallowed. "Yes, Sergeant." She turned and walked off, her limp rhythmic, steady. After she left, no one said a word for several minutes. Rivera felt heat creep up his neck, not from shame, but from the sharp bite of being publicly neutralized. He wasn't used to being dismissed. He didn't understand that real authority didn't raise its voice, it crushed with silence. That night in the barracks, Rivera threw his boots hard against the locker, frustrated. "She thinks she's above all of us. Just because she's got some damn scars and a limp doesn't make her special." No one responded. Not this time. The room had shifted. Earlier that day, while cleaning gear, Private Lewis had overheard one of the instructors talking. "You know who she is, right?" he'd whispered. "That's Phoenix. The one from the Alpha 7 convoy bombing. She pulled 3 soldiers out of a flaming Humvee." Lewis hadn't told Rivera yet, but he didn't need to. The way Elena held herself, the way she never flinched, never complained, never bragged, it was starting to say more than any rumor ever could. But Rivera was still caught in the illusion of toughness, blind to the difference between noise and strength. And soon, that illusion would come crashing down with fire, smoke, and silence. By the third week, the real separation began. Weak recruits started folding under pressure, and the strong began to emerge, not just in body, but in mind. Elena pushed them harder now. Wake-up calls came before sunrise. Obstacle courses were doubled. Gear inspections became ruthless. She didn't yell much, but when she did, her voice hit like a hammer striking steel. The recruits hated her and respected her in equal measure. One blistering afternoon, Elena stood before them at the base of the infamous Hill 40, a steep, jagged incline used to test endurance. "This time, you'll be climbing with full packs," she said, pacing before them. "You're going to the top and back. Twice. Anyone who drops gear or whines goes again." Groans erupted. "I didn't ask for commentary," she barked, eyes narrowing. "Move." The recruits scrambled. Rivera took off fast, determined to outpace everyone, especially her. But he didn't last. The weight wore him down. Halfway up the hill, sweat poured off his face and his legs began to shake. By the first summit, he collapsed beside a tree, panting, while Elena marched past him without breaking stride. She didn't look at him, didn't offer a word. By the time she made it back down and then started her second climb, recruits began noticing. "She's going again," Private Lewis muttered. "She didn't even rest," whispered someone else. Elena was now ahead of most of them again. Rivera gritted his teeth and forced himself up. He wasn't going to be shown up by her. But his legs weren't cooperating. As he stumbled back down the slope, his foot caught a root and he hit the ground hard, shoulder first. "Damn it," he growled. Elena was already coming up behind him again. "You all right, Private?" she asked, voice calm. "I'm fine," he snapped. "Then get up." He did, barely, and joined the others at the bottom. His pride was fractured, his confidence dented. But it wasn't the fall that hurt the most, it was the realization that Elena, the woman he mocked, had just dominated them all without flinching. Back at the barracks, bruises turned to silence. No jokes that night. Rivera sat quietly on his bunk, rubbing his aching knee. Across the room, Lewis looked over. "You really don't know who she is, do you?" he asked quietly. Rivera frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Phoenix," Lewis said. "That's what they called her. Alpha 7, Kandahar." Rivera rolled his eyes. "You mean that's real?" Lewis nodded. "She dragged 3 soldiers out of a burning vehicle. One on fire, took shrapnel to the face and arms. They thought she was dead. Rivera said nothing. You've been mocking a legend, man. That word legend gnawed at Rivera. He thought about the obstacle course, her silence, her strength, her eyes. She wasn't just some hard-ass drill instructor. She was something else entirely, but he couldn't admit it. Not yet. The next morning, Elena ordered another march, this one deeper into the woods, under simulated combat pressure. Stay alert, she told them. Stay together. And if you panic, you fail. Rivera was still sore, but he kept pace. The woods were dark, sounds echoing from hidden speakers, gunfire, shouting, simulated chaos. Fog rolled in as the sun dipped behind the trees. Suddenly, smoke grenades popped. A loud bang rang out. Recruits scattered. Rivera froze, his breath caught. He ducked behind a log, disoriented, vision blurred by fog and noise. Then he felt a firm grip yank him up by the vest. Move. Elena barked, pulling him to his feet. She ran beside him, dodging through fake fire and disorienting sound until they reached a rally point. Rivera fell to the ground, heaving. I didn't need saving, he muttered. Elena crouched beside him, her eyes emotionless. Good. Then next time, don't freeze. She walked away. But something had shifted in Rivera's chest, the crack forming where arrogance used to live. The woods still echoed in Rivera's ears long after the simulated firefight had ended. The smoke had cleared, the gunshots had faded into memory, but one thing remained: Elena Martinez dragging him out of the chaos. That image replayed in his mind again and again, her scarred hand gripping his vest, her eyes burning like live ammunition. He couldn't forget the way she looked at him, not with pity, not with rage, but with something worse, disappointment. The platoon marched back in silence. Even the usually loudmouthed recruits had nothing to say. Everyone had seen it: Rivera freeze, Elena pull him to safety. Later in the day, during the debriefing, Elena stood in front of them. Half of you moved like civilians. You panic, you scatter, you die, she said sharply. This was a simulation. Next time, it might not be. Rivera clenched his fists. She looked directly at him. Some of you are brave until you're tested. Others stay quiet and stand up when it counts. Figure out which one you are. The room stayed silent as she dismissed them. Rivera stayed seated a moment longer, his eyes burning into the floor. In the barracks that night, he was restless. Sleep evaded him. His pride, once inflated and untouchable, now lay tattered on the floor with his gear. He finally snapped. This is ridiculous, he muttered, throwing his shirt at the wall. She acts like she's some war hero, and we're all supposed to bow to her. It was just a simulation. Private Lewis, who had been silent all evening, looked up from his bunk. You think she acts like a hero? She doesn't even talk about it. You just keep disrespecting someone who's done more in one day than you've done in your whole life. Rivera glared. She saved me. Big deal. I didn't ask her to. Lewis stood up now. You didn't have to. She didn't ask for scars either, but she earned them. The room quieted. Then Elena walked in. She had heard every word. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't bark, she just stared Rivera down as if she were looking through him, not at him. You think this is about you? She asked. Her voice was low but sharp enough to cut. Rivera swallowed hard but said nothing. Elena stepped closer. You know how many soldiers froze just like you? Good people. People I trained with, laughed with, bled with. 1 second of hesitation in a firefight is all it takes. Her voice trembled slightly, not with weakness, but from the weight of memory. You think you know what this is? It's not a game. It's not about yelling or punishment. It's about staying alive when everything inside you wants to run. For a moment, the room seemed smaller, like the air had thickened around them. She turned away. You'll either learn what that means, or you'll break before you ever wear a uniform in battle. And just like that, she left. Rivera sat down slowly, chest tight. He didn't speak the rest of the night. The next morning, Elena led PT like usual, no acknowledgement of the previous night, no extra punishment. That was her way. But something had changed. Rivera followed every command precisely. He didn't crack jokes. He didn't look for laughs. He kept his eyes on her, trying for the first time to understand instead of judge. That afternoon, during weapons drills, he stayed late after everyone else had left. Elena noticed. She didn't say anything, just watched as he broke down and reassembled his rifle over and over, sweat dripping, hands shaking. Later, Lewis found him sitting alone outside. Starting to get it? He asked. Rivera nodded slowly. She doesn't need our respect. She already earned it. We're just late catching up. Lewis smiled, better late than never. But the real reckoning hadn't come yet. The next day, Rivera would be called into Colonel Stevens' office, and everything would change. The next morning started like any other, until Rivera's name echoed over the intercom. Private Rivera, report to Colonel Stevens' office immediately. Heads turned. Recruits stiffened. Rivera's throat tightened as he stood. The colonel, he hadn't done anything wrong, at least nothing that warranted the base's highest authority. With nerves building, he followed the winding path through administration, past salutes and guarded doors, until he reached the colonel's office. A stern officer opened the door. Enter. Rivera stepped inside. Colonel Stevens sat behind a large desk decorated with awards and photographs. He looked up with sharp eyes, gray, unreadable. Sit down, Private. Rivera obeyed. The colonel leaned back and folded his hands. You've been under Sergeant Martinez's command for 3 weeks. Yes, sir. You've questioned her, mocked her, challenged her authority. Rivera opened his mouth, but Stevens raised a hand. I'm not interested in your excuses. I want you to see something. He turned to a nearby cabinet, opened it, and pulled out a thick folder marked classified. Inside was a flash drive. He inserted it into a monitor. The screen flickered on. Rivera watched, frozen. The footage was grainy body cam and drone footage spliced together. A Humvee convoy traveling through a dusty Afghan road. Then an explosion, fire, screams, chaos. One soldier, already on fire, crawled from the wreckage. The others were unconscious or pinned. Then she appeared, Elena, scarless, younger, but still her. She was bleeding from her head, limping heavily. She screamed into her comms and ran straight into the flames. One by one, she pulled soldiers from the vehicle. Her arms caught fire. Still, she dragged them, rolling, crawling, refusing to stop. When she pulled the last one free, her entire back was scorched, her face mangled. The video paused on the final image, her lying beside the men she saved, motionless, smoke rising from her gear. Stevens spoke. She flatlined twice before the medics brought her back. Spent 6 months in ICU. Dozens of surgeries. Then she came back here and asked to serve again. Rivera was silent, trembling. She didn't come back for medals. She came back to train soldiers so they wouldn't die the way her brothers almost did. The colonel stared at him. Her call sign was Phoenix because she rose from ashes. And you mocked her. Rivera's eyes burned. Sir, I didn't know. No, Stevens said. You didn't care to know. That's worse. He leaned in, his voice low. You think scars make someone weak? Every scar she carries is a reminder that others lived because she bled. Rivera swallowed hard. She didn't report you. She didn't shame you in front of others. But I'm doing it now, because it's time you understood what real strength looks like. Stevens stood. You're dismissed. Rivera stood on unsteady legs, saluted shakily, and exited the room without a word. Outside, the air felt heavier. The world looked different. He sat under a tree beside the path, hands buried in his face, shame wrapped around him like a vice. Back at the barracks, recruits noticed his absence. When he returned, he said nothing. He walked straight to Elena's office, knocked once. She looked up. He stood at attention. I saw the footage, Sergeant. I saw you in Afghanistan. I saw Phoenix. She didn't blink, his voice cracked. I'm sorry for everything. She stood slowly, walked to him, and studied him. You think one apology makes it right? No, Sergeant. I just wanted you to know I see it now. A long silence passed. She nodded once, then act like it. He saluted and left. For the first time since arriving, he felt small, not because she'd made him feel that way, but because he finally understood the scale of her strength, and in that moment, Marcus Rivera took his first real step toward becoming a soldier. The next morning, Rivera was the first one awake. He stood in the dark outside the barracks, fully dressed, boots laced, rifle cleaned. Not to impress anyone, but because he couldn't sleep. The colonel's words, Elena's silence, and the fire-lit image of Phoenix dragging lives from hell looped in his mind like a punishment. When Elena arrived for morning PT, she raised a brow at the sight of him already in formation. You're early, she said. No excuse not to be, Sergeant. A pause, then a short nod. The others trickled in with sleepy eyes and sore legs. Rivera didn't speak. He helped set up the cones. He ran every drill with ruthless focus, keeping pace even when his chest burned. No complaints, no showboating, just grit. The change didn't go unnoticed. Private Lewis caught up to him during a water break. You all right, man? Rivera wiped his face and nodded. I was wrong. That's all. I've got a lot to fix. Lewis gave a half smile. She'll see it. She watches everything. Elena, true to form, never said a word about his transformation. But she tested him. She assigned him the lead on fire team movement drills, something he had failed miserably at before. This time, he didn't stumble. He listened, adjusted, communicated. When a teammate twisted his ankle, Rivera dropped to help carry him through the rest of the course. Elena stood at a distance, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. Later, in the training bay, she called him aside. You think because you saw one video, you know who I am? No, Sergeant. I think because I watched you lead, I'm just starting to understand. She studied him. Pain teaches, but it doesn't always stick. You're serious now. Will you stay that way? I will. Another silence passed between them. Then she handed him a stack of manuals. Study these. You'll be giving tomorrow's gear briefing. His jaw dropped slightly. That role usually went to top-tier recruits. Yes, Sergeant, he said quickly, surprised but honored. As he walked away, Elena allowed herself the smallest of smiles, not because he'd changed overnight, but because she knew what it looked like when pride shattered and something better was rebuilt. That evening, Rivera sat alone outside the barracks, manuals in hand, reading under a lamplight. His posture straight, lips moving silently as he rehearsed. Nearby, Elena leaned against a wall, watching. It wasn't about the apology anymore. It was about discipline, about heart. He had finally begun to carry what she wanted every soldier under her to understand, the burden of responsibility. Later that night, Colonel Stevens visited the training grounds. Elena stood with him by the firing range. He seems different, the colonel said, eyes on Rivera in the distance. Elena nodded once. Pain reached him. Do you think he gets it now? We'll see. Respect is earned when no one's watching. And he's just started earning his own. Stevens smiled slightly. He's lucky you didn't crush him. You've done more than just train him, you've given him a mirror. I didn't give it to him, she replied. He found it. I just didn't look away when he saw who he really was. They watched in silence as Rivera helped another recruit adjust their shooting stance, patient and quiet. No more mocking, no more noise. Just action. And Elena knew, true change didn't come with grand speeches. It came with a soldier quietly standing taller than the day before. By the 7th week, the platoon was leaner, harder, and quieter. The weak had been weeded out. The rest had learned that becoming a soldier wasn't about ego or attitude, it was about endurance, respect, and showing up even when everything hurt. Marcus Rivera had become one of the strongest, not because he ran the fastest or lifted the most, but because he had finally stopped trying to prove something to everyone and started proving it to himself. During a weapons inspection, his rifle was spotless, his uniform flawless. Elena walked past without a word, and that silence now felt like approval. Later that day, Elena stood before the platoon. Tomorrow is field evaluation. You'll be operating in live fire simulation. Squad leaders have been chosen. She called out names. When she reached Rivera, she didn't pause. Squad Charlie. Rivera, you lead. He blinked. For a second, he thought he heard wrong. But the others looked at him with nods of acknowledgement, no longer mockery, no longer pity. Just respect. Yes, Sergeant, he replied, standing tall. That night, he studied the terrain maps, memorized call signs, assigned roles. He didn't sleep. He didn't need to. He was ready. The field exercise began at dawn. Fog rolled over the hills, turning everything into a gray blur. Recruits moved like shadows through the underbrush. Paint rounds fired from hidden stations. Explosions echoed in the distance. Rivera moved with purpose. He signaled, he watched over his team, he led with steady hands and sharper focus. When a recruit tripped and rolled down a shallow slope, Rivera didn't yell. He dropped beside him, checked for injury, pulled him up, and they moved together. Elena watched from the command tent, her expression unreadable, headset crackling with field comms. Charlie squad is clean, an observer noted. Rivera's holding the line. Hours passed. Simulated injuries, team retrievals, time pressure. Rivera's squad completed the mission in near record time with no casualties. When they returned, covered in dirt and sweat, Elena stood waiting. She stepped forward, her eyes locked with Rivera's. Report, squad leader. Squad Charlie accounted for 0 lost. 1 minor injury. Mission completed, Sergeant. She didn't smile, but she nodded. Good. Fallout. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Rivera walked to her office again, not as a recruit desperate for forgiveness, but as a soldier grateful for growth. She looked up when he entered. Why are you here? I wanted to thank you, he said. Not for giving me a second chance, but for not protecting me from my own stupidity. You let me fall. She leaned back, arms crossed, and you got back up. He nodded. I didn't understand before. The scars, the silence. I thought it made you less. But it makes you more. You didn't just survive, you came back to make people better. There was a pause. Then Elena stood and stepped closer. You know what my CO told me after Kandahar? He said the only thing more dangerous than a bullet is a man who refuses to learn. She pointed to her scars. These aren't what almost killed me. It was thinking I had nothing left to offer afterward. Rivera met her eyes. You were wrong. I know, she said. So were you. A silence passed. This one wasn't heavy, it was earned. She extended her hand. He shook it firmly. You're not finished yet, she said. But you're becoming someone I'd trust in my squad. That meant more than any medal. Later, at the campfire pit outside the barracks, the recruits sat around eating MREs and telling stories. Rivera listened more than he spoke. A few glanced at him and nodded. He wasn't the loudest anymore. He didn't need to be. The fire danced across his face, and across Elena's scars as she passed by in the dark, silent and sharp. This time, no one mocked her. They stood a little straighter when she walked by, because now they all knew who she was. And who he was becoming.